Hello everyone on Facebook.
Hi guys, wrong hand. I was waving over here. She flips it and I can't do it.
Welcome to the Tall and the Short of It Education Conversations with
Betsy
and Jenny. And we are continuing our All Things Preschool month.
I gotta go get something Jenny left over on the desk that she needs, so you keep talking.
Okay, sorry. I probably something that yeah. Yeah, I asked for this. It's a visual aid that we'll need in a little bit, but yes, for sure. So,
not only did you ask for it, I knew exactly where it was and grabbed it in seconds. That's
true.
Amazing if you could see over there.
So, always remember, if you're watching us on replay, give us a hashtag replay. Make sure you comment and ask questions if you want to so we can have a conversation with you. So, today's topic is developmental delay. Last week we talked about communication, speech and language, and we had our guest, Allison, who's amazing.
I just tried to get her to come back on with us as she was walking out, but
yeah, so shout out to Allison again, because she's amazing. But this week we're going to talk about developmental delay. So, definition of developmental delay is kind of complicated. So, Betsy, you want to talk about the 5 areas that we have to assess if we're going to say a child has a developmental delay?
Okay. Well, we're going to look at their motor development. We're going to look at their communication, their or language development, their social emotional development, their cognitive development, and their self-help skills.
Right. And self-help skills would be things like toileting,
Maybe
what other things?
Like drinking,
eating.
And, or, just being able to do, the goal is for...
Lift your arms up so I can put this shirt on you.
The goal is for them to do it on their own, but...
Right. But when we're talking about preschoolers, we're talking about they're cooperative with assist, right?
Yes.
So,
or, a big one. Wiping and blowing your own nose.
There we go.
Come
That's
on.
one. Yes.
Tying
shoes becomes one of those things later on. Yeah, for sure. So, motor development, those would be things like OT and PT, right? So the occupational therapy, physical therapy, which is our fine motor skills and our gross motor skills, small muscles and large muscles. We talked about speech and language last week.
Yep. Social emotional is just regulating, like, can they like help calm themselves down? I mean, not that they're going to need support again, but
with prompting.
Yeah. Can they work through that, or responding appropriately when say they're playing with another. Hey, Jake.
Hey.
Playing with a peer, getting super angry when the peer sits down next to them, and it's like, okay,
or things like just irrational responses in typical situations. That could be a reason why, so we're getting hearts, yay. And then cognitive development is, how's the brain going? How's processing speed, their memory, and their understanding directions.
Right, as I was saying, at this age, you're saying they're going, okay, well, they're not reading yet. They're not, but it's like, are they starting to pick up on some colors?
Do they imitate?
Yes. Or do they, are they excited about their favorite book because they know what's coming up next?
It's kind of like all that pre-academic stuff.
Recognizing characters and, knowing kind of about like what types of the things that they like, and even playing with toys, like, okay, I'm playing with a toy truck, I'm using it like an actual
that pretend play.
Yes. And I mean, not that they can't use things that aren't like how many kids use the remote for a phone. That's that's not bad necessarily, but I'm just saying, but also using things for their intended purposes, they're making that connection.
Yep, absolutely. So, in order for a child to be considered developmentally delayed, there's 2 different ways you can do that. So, the first one, and I'm going to say it, and then we're going to explain it, because, like, when I say it, you're going to be like, what? Unless you're a school psychologist or a teacher that's used to dealing with these words. So, one way to qualify is to have, in one of those 5 areas, you scored 2 or more standard deviations below the mean or the average of an average kid, okay? The other way is in 2 or more of those areas, you scored 1.5 standard deviations below the average, okay? So what does that mean? What are those standard deviations? So I'll hold up the visual, and Betsy can kind of point for me so that I don't have to point and talk. So if you look, this is called a bell curve. I hope I've got this in a spot where you can see it pretty well.
Basically, though, I do have it like the yellow and the pink.
Yes.
And then
so
is where you...
The yellow part, basically whenever you test a student, most kids, 60% of kids are going to fall in that yellow area, right in the center.
Right in here.
And the average score in that is a 100 or the 50th percentile. So sometimes we think 50%, oh, that's only half. No. Percentile means you're right in the middle, the 50th percentile, okay? Now those pink sections that is this pink or red? I don't know.
No, they're pink.
They're pink sections
It's
on
probably
either
whatever marker I
side.
had at the time.
That is 1 standard deviation either below or above the average. Okay, so the yellow being the average, the pink is 1 standard deviation. So those are a lot smaller chunks, right? Those are smaller pieces. And those percentiles range anywhere from about the 3rd percentile up to about the 20th percentile, okay? So, those kiddos, if you're in this area down here,
The pink area.
that's 1 standard deviation below. And guess what? You're still not developmentally delayed if you're in that range. You have to be 1.5, wait, I'm sorry, no, this is 1.
Yeah.
1 standard deviation is the pink area. But 1.5 would be right in the middle of that pink, which is what, about the 6th percentile?
Yeah.
Somewhere around in there? Yeah.
6th, 7th, yeah.
So the 6th percentile means that if your child scored at the 6th percentile in, let's say, language development, that would mean that if 100 kids were tested, your child would have that means that your child would have scored better than only 6 kids. Okay, everyone else would have scored better than them. So that's a pretty low score. Now 2 standard deviations below the mean, and Betsy's going to point at those. Those are still white, and they're really tiny slivers down here.
Well, that's what I'm looking
at, right?
Yeah. So 2.
So if your child's at the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd percentile, basically, in any category of those 5. That's going to mean they're 2 standard deviations.
And you see,
below.
like, the yellow was a bigger area. That's because more people fall in that area.
Right.
And the pink's smaller, fewer people. And, like, as it gets smaller and smaller, fewer people. So it isn't a big...
Right. So when a kid takes a standardized test, there's always that bell curve that's considered. And when they tell you your child is in the average range, it's that between that, like, 35th to 65th percentile. Right around in there, with 50 being the average, okay? So if we test a kiddo who's getting ready to turn 3 to be in our preschool, and their language is, let's say, at the 1st percentile, could they be developmentally delayed, Betsy?
Oh, at the 1st percentile.
Yes.
Sorry, yes.
Yes, because you only have to have 1 of those areas.
I was, in my head, you were going down 1%. See, it's...
See how confusing it is? So if you have 1 area that's at the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd percentile, you're probably going to qualify as developmentally delayed, okay? Now, if you have, maybe you have your child tested and you have your motor development is at the 8th percentile and your self-help is at the 8th percentile and your cognitive's at the 10th. So we've got all these things that are single digits, but they're not that 6th percentile or lower. Your child may not qualify for developmental delay.
They may qualify for, like, the area of speech and language or something, but not for
maybe just 1. But like I said, the thresholds for that are a little higher.
Yeah.
That they could qualify for some services in those other areas. So they have to be pretty low to qualify for developmental delay. Sometimes, but it's always a case conference decision. If we look in there and we see there's a lot of areas that are pretty low, we may, as a case conference, decide to go ahead and make them DD if they need that extra help, and we feel that would be beneficial to them before kindergarten.
Yeah, especially if maybe there's like you had mentioned 3 areas and they were kind of close and low. You know, you're like, okay, wait,
that's way different than one area. Yeah, for sure. So the reason, this doesn't get any less complex as we move forward talking about this, okay? So prior to July 1 of 2018, you could only have a developmental delay label if you were ages 3 to age 5. Once you turn 5,
it's gone.
You don't get to keep that as you go into kindergarten. Okay? It just would fall off. Yep. And you would be left with no services or an IEP unless you qualified for some other school age label when you went to kindergarten. So unless you qualified for autism or you qualified for other health impairment because of some other issue that you had already diagnosed, or you had a physical disability. You know, because I don't know if we talked about this yet or not, but it's really super hard to qualify for a specific learning disability in kindergarten. Why is that? Because, remember this bell curve? Kindergartners aren't expected to know anything yet.
Yeah.
So whenever we test a kindergartner on a standardized test, whenever you test a kindergartner with a standardized test, it says they're average. Because
they're doing better than the standardized tests expect them to be doing.
Exactly. And like I said, our district in and of itself even has higher expectations than most districts. So it's really hard to qualify for services in our district.
Yes.
Because you have to show that you're not making educational progress. If you haven't even had a minute to be in school, it's really hard for you to qualify for one of those school age labels. So again, what was happening was they would be in our preschool with this developmental disability label or developmental delay label. They'd turn 5, go to kindergarten, and then it would fall off and they would have no services, no special ed services at all. And then what would happen is what I kept calling the revolving door. By about end of 1st grade, beginning of 2nd grade, teachers were going, hey, I think this child needs special education, because that delay had never been resolved. And they weren't provided those additional supports in kindergarten and 1st grade. And now we were testing them all over again because there was big enough gap now between what they should know and what they do know that we were able to provide them with that label so that they could get special ed services. So the revolving door is what was happening. We had them, then they were out, and then we had them again. So, and some of that is still happening now because, again, this legislation just happened last July. Where now, as of July 1, 2018, we can leave the developmental delay label on a student until their 9th birthday. So that's a pretty big deal. Like, we lobbied for this in the state of Indiana because a lot of other states had already been doing it. And we would get
kids moving, like from Kentucky. They had they had a higher, I think their age is 8.
There,
you're shaking.
Oh, sorry.
We would have kids move in who had that label.
Yeah, and we don't have that label.
We don't have it. And so, you know, either we would have to sign for testing to figure it out, or they just wouldn't have their IEP anymore. So that was always rough when you got a student move in that you knew had these services, and it's like, well, that doesn't exist here. So because when you do move from school to school, your IEP follows you
with you. And if you move to another state and they don't have the same rules, then you have to go by the new state's rules.
Yeah.
So, so now here's this new dilemma that we have, because in the past we would have maybe 1 or 2 kids that would go to kindergarten with a label that were not just speech or language. Okay, so speech and language kids a lot of times would keep their labels and just go right on to kindergarten and still get speech services, and they were fine. But again, the kids that had DD were just getting dropped, and then they didn't have any services. Well, so last year we had 2, right? We had 2 kids that went from preschool to kindergarten.
Because those kids they're not in my classroom, but they're on my caseload.
Right. So we had 2 kids that went from kindergarten to, from preschool to kindergarten with a school age label.
Oh, wait.
And mostly, what was it even 1?
We have 3.
Was there 3?
Oh, wait, from last year? Sorry.
I think there only might have been one that wasn't just speech and language.
No.
Or was it two?
I have one in here, and I have one in another classroom. But I think we're at 3. I think we're at 3.
So 3. But again, less than 5 kids, right? Next year, because they get to keep their DD label, we have over 15 students going from preschool to kindergarten who are going to need a special ed teacher who gives them services that we didn't have before. And that is we need different personnel for that. So it's a money issue in a way, because we're now having to provide services to kids we weren't providing them for before. Even though it's a good thing, this is a good thing, it does have some crazy impact on school districts. So think of the big school districts. Ours is a tiny district.
Yeah.
Think of the big school districts.
I was going to say,
some of them
when I heard that
100
number,
or more kids.
When I heard that number, because that's my job. I have a self-contained classroom, but then I also am the teacher of record for the kindergarten kiddos that are out in the regular classroom. And I was like, what? No. No.
She's like, I can't get 15 kids on top of my self-contained class.
No.
That's not going to happen. So, so we have to do some restructuring, because it's not like we have more funds. We have a little bit more special ed funds because they're keeping the DD label. But the money that we'll get from the state for keeping those 15 to 16 kids with the DD label is less money than what it costs to hire one aide. So, we're not going to get a teacher out of the funds that we will get for those kids. So we're going to have to handle it with the teachers we have. So we're looking at doing some restructuring, all of that kind of stuff to make sure. And schools all over the Indiana are doing the same thing. Because like I said, think about the larger districts that are going to have 100 or more of these kids that never needed a teacher of record before.
Right.
That would be doing their paperwork and making sure they were getting their services. So it's going to be interesting to see how all the schools in Indiana handle that, and how it either helps or, is this something that is helpful or not? Because my worry is that there's going to be this unintended consequence, that we're going to have kids going into kindergarten who would have stayed in their classrooms all day long, getting the full benefit of kindergarten without being pulled out a lot. And now I'm worried that kindergarten teachers are going to want them pulled out of the classroom for more services. And they're going to miss being in that full kindergarten experience. So I don't know if we want to handle that through mostly consultation, which I hope. Those are decisions that are still being made by a lot of districts.
I also think because we've talked a lot, just about kids going into kindergarten in general. Our preschool is not full day. It is half day, and but it's 4 days a week. And those kids aren't used to being in a classroom all day long. And then also, last week we kind of talked about, or the week before, how some preschools are structured differently, and how some have your typically developing peers, and we don't have that as a part of our preschool right now. And I love it. We do, but that's different too. Having those that language rich environment, and having those peer models. Our kids learn so much from their peers and pick up on that language. So we've always talked about too, giving it a period of time, first 9 weeks. Let's see how things are going. Let's see who's making progress, because so much progress can be made in that first 9 weeks.
All of the kids, regardless of whether they have an IEP or not, are going to be learning to do kindergarten.
Yeah.
So they need to have a minute. Give them a minute before we start trying to add all these additional services in. So if you have a child, maybe you're out there and you're watching this and you're going, well, I want my child to have all these services going into kindergarten because they're going to keep their DD label. Think about that for a second think about what you're really asking for there, because research shows that the more they're included in general education, the better they do. So don't be so quick to thinking I want more because now they are going to kindergarten with an IEP where they wouldn't have before. The more your child stays in general education with his typical peers, the more likely he is to do better. So just be aware of that. It's not something we want to do to immediately start pulling kids out a lot more just because they have a teacher of record now.
Yeah.
So that's just a big caution I want to throw out there to
I mean,
people
if they get speech and language, that typically is pull out.
It can be, yeah. But we're also even looking at more models for push-in for speech and language.
I'll be honest, mine happens in my classroom, the majority of it.
And I think there's a lot of changes coming down the pike as research keeps showing more and more. The less pull out, the better. For those kids that are just delayed or have those milder disabilities. Kids with moderate severe disabilities, there's some research out there showing it's good to include them too sometimes, but they also need more specially designed instruction at other times of the day too. So, and like I said, our disclaimer is this is always our opinions.
Yeah.
You can disagree if you choose, and we're happy to have you comment about that if you choose.
We love discussion.
Absolutely. So, what else? What else do we need to talk about?
Let's talk about, there are some factors that a child may, sorry, the word just escaped me, may show us some, may, on paper qualify for a developmental delay due to like their numbers and stuff. However, there are some excluding factors.
Right.
If they've never had instruction, they've never been, granted, yes, if they're 3 years old and, obviously they probably haven't been in school, but maybe if they didn't utilize first step services. And so they had never had any type of therapy happening in their house, or
or even just they don't hang out with other kids ever.
Yeah. And it is a case-by-case basis, and it is something that as a case conference committee is decided. And I would say, I don't know that we've necessarily had this come up, but in my head, a time I'm thinking that this could be a part of something is maybe like a foster child who is
been moved from place to place to place to place,
or was removed from not a great placement, and
then we're back to trauma.
Yes, so that's in my head.
Yeah.
Honestly, most kids are exposed to playing, people playing with the child and just being, all that kind of stuff. So anyways,
but a child who's experienced a lot of neglect or things like that may not have had as much experience.
Yeah. And then another one would be limited English proficiency. So if this child is coming from a home where English is not their first language, and they've been hearing, Spanish or French or
Chinese, any of those, and all day, you can't really test them in English and expect them to score well.
Right.
So you can't say a child has a developmental delay if they can't even speak English, unless you've tested them in their home language and they're delayed in their home language. So that's, and that's hard to find sometimes. So I'm going to tell you what, if I had it to do all over again, I would have stayed in Spanish classes. If you're out there and you're still in school, keep taking Spanish your whole life, and you'll be able to write your own paycheck someday, because you would not believe the amount of money I pay for bilingual speech evaluations. OMG.
Yes.
So,
yes.
If you are bilingual, you can charge anything you want to anyone, and they have to pay you because there's hardly any of those. Yes, just saying. So, keep taking Spanish. Just telling you, it's amazing. So, okay. So, who decides? Who decides this stuff about whether or not my kid's going to qualify? Well, you're going to definitely have a speech pathologist that'll be involved because they have to measure that language. You're going to have your child's preschool teacher is probably the developmental preschool teacher will be involved in the team because they'll analyze this rating scale called an I-STAR-KR or some other achievement measure.
The developmental preschool teacher is a special education teacher. They have a special education license. So they're called a developmental preschool teacher, but that's what it means.
Exactly. They still have that special ed license. And then sometimes OT and PT will be on that team, helping to determine those motor skills. And like I said, they'll look at all kinds of development to determine which of those areas the child would qualify in. So, like I said, you'll probably get a bunch of rating scales you have to fill out if you decide to have your child tested.
And we may ask, like, if we might have you fill one out for your child if they go to a daycare, have another caregiver,
or even a Sunday school teacher. We've had that before.
Have other people, the more information we can get, the better it is.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's pretty much everything. I mean, we just have to make sure that by the time they turn 9, if we want to keep them in special education because we feel they still have needs that need to be worked on, then we have to reevaluate them at that point for a school age label. That's one of those 13 categories of special ed that's in our Indiana law that isn't developmental delay. Because like I said, they can't keep that one after their 9th birthday.
You had mentioned the iStar Care. Something I do like about that is the rating scale.
Hi, Patty.
That we use, and I like it because we continue using that same rating scale. The teacher, the special education teacher, continues to use that to monitor the growth. To monitor that progress. So I really like that.
I do too, and I'm kind of sad because the state is doing a thing right now where they're asking for vendors to look at modifying or redoing iStar KR. And I really like iStar KR, so I hope that when they redo it, they're just updating the language of it and they're not really changing it all that much because I just really like it.
Right now, this may seem a little off topic, but I am writing a curriculum, a preschool curriculum for outside of school, and I am using the iStar KR, and I really like how some of the pieces of it, the language piece, there's like a reading. Anyway, they move into our standards, and it just you leave off it has the iStar KR and it has its little different scale on it, and then it goes into kindergarten and even a first grade standards. So it makes sense. You understand why. Why you're teaching what you're teaching.
Exactly. And sometimes it's really hard for a student to respond when they're in preschool about everything, but you can go through as a caregiver or a parent or a teacher and go through and circle the things that you've witnessed that child be able to do. So that's a good thing. Okay, well, next week we're doing some miscellaneous stuff, right? I think that's what was on the graphic. It's just some miscellaneous preschool stuff we haven't talked about yet. I know we want to talk about preschool funding and how that works next week, the legislative piece,
we don't want to talk about
which the House budget for Indiana just came out, and I have some more information that we'll share with you next week on that.
You're such a dork.
I know I'm a big legal dork, but that's how I do.
See, guys, I don't have to look at this stuff because she just tells me. So I just wait until she gives me the information, and I'm like,
yes.
Yeah.
So if you have
like
a
my
chance,
Alexa.
If you have a chance this week, make sure you tell your congressman here in Indiana to up that preschool funding for special education, because that was our main goal in our Indiana Council for Administrators of Special Ed this year, is we were wanting to have that amount up, because it's been $2,750 since 1991. Really? Like no inflation, nothing since then. So, but we need that money for our preschool students. And like I said, I'll go in depth into that more next week. But drop them a line, drop them an email, give them a call. Say, hey, make sure preschool funding gets increased. Yeah, because we need that for our schools. All right, well, anything else for the good of the cause today?
I don't think so.
Don't think so. Okay, well, this has been a wonderful discussion about developmental delay. And that's it for the tall and the short of it this week. All right, bye, guys.
Bye.